I used to do just-in-time series back in the days. If you don't know what it is the mistakes taken care of. If you don't know what you're doing wrong, this is all about it. I'm here to tell you, and if you apply these tips to your work, you will grow a lot faster. Just learn from my mistakes, you'll be good to go. You can consider this a free mentorship from me. How cool is that? If you want to, you can send over your photos to my Gmail for a free critique in the next episodes. Now buckle up and let's get started. So this is the photo that I'm going to be presenting to you today, and it's a piece of trash which I created a couple years ago, and that's the whole point. I'm going to be presenting to you my pieces of trashes that I have created over the years, and I have spotted the mistakes, errors, and all the creepy, weird things that I have done in these photos, mostly dumb stuff, and I'm going to show you these mistakes. So if you are just getting started with photo manipulation or composition art and you struggle, this is going to be a perfect series for you, because you are going to discover all the weak spots that you might have in your artworks, because we all share the common mistakes as beginners when we first start out, and then you can apply these tips into your artwork and see if there are similar situations so you can fix them, level up faster. Let's get started. Alright, as I said, I'm going to show you some of my old photos and go over the mistakes that I used to make as a beginner. So if you are making these mistakes, stop them today so you can level up a lot faster than I did. And here's a photo I made quite a while ago. I guess 3 to 4 years ago I made this manipulation, and it's a very simple composition. There are actually only 2 photos here. There's me and there's this background. Of course I had to do lots of content aware to get rid of the stuff that I didn't want to, and there are still signs of that content aware fill remaining, as you can see over here. I used the content aware fill to remove something that was here. Anyway, this is the photo, and there are a couple of mistakes here. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is the depth of field that I have done, and it's quite awful. Let me zoom in on my hand and take a look at this. Do you see how I blurred my hand? It is very, very terrible. This is the sort of blur that I see some beginners tend to do. They make a selection of the area they want to apply the blur to, and then they blur it. But the problem with that is that you're gonna have some weird effect happening like this, where the inside of that object is blurry and the outside line is still visible. Like, what kind of terrifying blur is this? And this happens when you make a selection and then you apply the blur to that selection. So never make a selection when you are trying to blur something. Just go ahead and blur it naturally without making any selections, because as you can see, this is what happens. You will get some ghosting and some halos around that thing, which doesn't really look good, and this is very amateur, very beginner type of thing, and you need to avoid it at all costs. If you have no blur, that is way better than having a blur that looks like this. If I create a new layer, go ahead and grab my blur tool and try to blur these edges. It might help a bit because it actually removes that sharp line that I have, but still it does not eliminate it all. You can still tell that this is a very amateur and fake kind of blur. I made it look a little better now by removing that sharp line, but avoid doing these kind of mistakes. Avoid doing this kind of depth of fields. I recommend, if you are going to apply any kind of depth of field into your photos, try to create a luminosity mask or go with something like a depth map or even field blur, and you'll be good to go. The second kind of mistake that beginners tend to make when they are trying to create a manipulation is overdoing stuff. Of course, we are human and we tend to overdo some of the things that we do. Of course, that's natural, but in this case, when beginners try to make their photos be more clear, be sharper, trying to increase the clarity of their image, they overdo it so much that it actually destroys the photo, just as I used to do. Again, I'm gonna zoom in on my image and you can see this photo is way too sharp. Just look at it. Look at these edges. You see how much sharpness I have added to this image. You can actually see all the grain and all the noise. The lines are actually way too visible. It is way too sharp. You can even tell that it's sharper than it should be even from here. Sharpening images way too much is something you need to avoid. I know many guys tend to sharpen their photos using Camera Raw, so if you are going to use Camera Raw for sharpening, this is how I recommend you do that. I'll go over to the Detail tab and I'm going to sharpen my image. The first thing you need to do is to zoom in onto your image about 100%. This is what I like to do so I have more control over the details. Then hold Alt and increase the sharpening. Though I don't recommend you go any higher than 50 because that'll blow up your photo. Usually I tend to keep it even below 30, so in this case I'll go with 25. And then increase the masking. Hold Alt and again increase it. There you go. And leave at the point where you see this white line around only the edges. So only leave it around the edges, somewhere about here. This is good. This is a proper way of sharpening a photo. But since I have already made this image way too sharp, I'm going to bring the sharpening down to 0, and I'm going to apply some noise reduction to reduce the noise that has been already created by sharpening the photo way too much. Okay, just applying a little bit of noise reduction to this. This is the second mistake. Sharpening way too much, increasing the clarity and texture to the point where you actually destroy the photo. Don't ever do this. Let's move on to the third mistake. The third mistake that I made when I was making this manipulation is not paying enough attention to the environment. Now, this might seem like a simple thing. You have to pay attention to what photos you use, and you have to always pay attention to your environment because it is important as much as your subject is important. But in this case, I did not really pay enough attention to my environment because there are some fatal mistakes in it. First, look at this water puddle here. Do you see that? There is a reflection of some words from this graffiti wall in this water puddle, but where is the word? There are no words on the wall, but there is a reflection in this water. Well, that doesn't make sense. Yeah, I know. I put this reflection in the water without even knowing that there is not anything on the wall that is going to reflect onto this water. That's a very dumb and stupid mistake to make. So if you're ever trying to add anything into your scene, especially if it has anything to do with reflections, lights, or shadows, make sure that the main source of that light or reflection is actually in your image. In this case, it is not. So this is a very bad mistake. I probably should have removed this water puddle instead of trying to be nice and be professional by adding a little freaking reflection in it and think to myself, oh, I've done a great job. Anyways, the second is this kind of weird patch on this wall. As I said, I use content aware to remove something that was on the wall, but there's a little bit of it left, and I should have taken care of that because that looks ugly. Yeah, I know, it's a wall and it's old and it's dirty, but this is so visible that it's been created by me and not by the photo itself. It's about not being careful. And the last one is this little thing on the ground. You see, this is something, I don't know, it's a trash, a garbage, and I should have taken care of it, but I didn't. It was as simple as just grabbing the patch tool and just moving this thing over. And there you go, it's gone. But I didn't do that. I was too lazy to do that, or even I didn't even notice. But again, with that thing on the ground, there is some distraction happening, but as soon as you remove it, the distraction will go away. So always pay attention to these little stuff. Take care of your environment and try to act like a professional. Do not think that if you have a proper subject, your photo is going to be great. No, your background matters as much as your subject does. The next mistake that beginners tend to make in their compositions, or rather I used to make in my compositions, is fake lens flares. Look at this lens flare in the front. Do you see that? I'm sure you do because it's obvious as hell, and that is the problem with it. This is the type of lens flare that I created by going into Filter, Render, Lens Flare. Yes, you can create lens flares from within Photoshop, as I suppose you already know, but these lens flares look very digital and artificial and they not look real at all. If you ever try to create lens flares or use lens flares in your photos, try to look up some good overlays or natural ones, or even look up some photo references and see how the natural lens flare actually acts like. And do not ever use lens flares like this, because this yells at you that, hey, I have been added to this photo by Photoshop, and only by looking at this small lens flare in the front, I could have told that this photo is Photoshop. So these things, overlays, as they are very efficient and a very good way to improve the look of your overall photo, they can be a disaster if you don't know how to use them properly. So be careful of that. Okay, the next mistake I want to mention is with the shadows. I'm going to zoom in on my feet, and I want you to pay close attention to the bottom of my feet. Do you see these shadows? Okay, I'm going to highlight them for you so you can trace them. There you go. These shadows are very spread out. Meanwhile, the real shadow in the real world does not spread so much. The thing I have painted down here beneath my feet is kind of a cast shadow, while I should have had a contact shadow. If you have any photos of yourself standing on the ground or just sitting like this on the floor, or if you have any kind of reference photos that the model is posing something like this, try to look up their feet, try to take a look at how the shadow is being casted on the ground, and I'm sure you will agree with me that this kind of shadow is very awful and terrible, and it very much looks amateur. And this is like one of the very common mistakes beginners tend to make. They make the shadows very spread out. This is an unforgivable mistake, because if you take a look at any kind of reference photos, you see the shadow, the contact shadow rather, is a very thin line and it's very close to the feet. It does not spread out like this. So pay attention to the type of shadows you are going to paint. I'll have a video or two about the shadows on my channel. I guess you can look them up if you want to, and as I have always said, shadows are going to be the thing that make your photo look realistic, so they need extra attention. But again, be mindful of this. Do not ever paint your shadows like that, because that simply sucks. Mistake number I don't know what. This mistake is something again very common, and it has something to do with the edges. Do you see these edges? There is a very weird solid black line around the edges of my selection, and I don't know why some guys do not take care of these edges. I used to do the same. These edges can be easily treated by actually clipping a layer to the model layer and painting with a brush over these edges just to remove this weird line that happens around the selection, and it can massively improve the overall look of your manipulation. I don't know, but still some guys do not know this, and their selection is kind of weird every time they make a composition. The first thing I tell them is to just take care of your selection. What is it? There you go. You can see around the face over here there's a very weird line happening. I could have taken care of it just by simply taking a brush, sampling a color from within the model and close to the edge, and slightly painting over it, and it would immediately remove that freaking line, and it would improve the look of my composition 100 times more. So please be mindful of your selection. Selection is one of the keys to a great composition. This one is a very basic one, and it's almost dumb that I still see some guys make this mistake, and they later on, when they're trying to post their photos on social media, they realize that, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Well, I'm gonna tell you, you still doing this? Stop it. Before you start your manipulation, crop your photo to a proper aspect ratio. I don't know what kind of aspect ratio this photo is, but it looks weird. I'm going to get my crop tool, and I recommend you crop your photos 4:5 if it's vertical and 16:9 if it's horizontal. But mainly you guys create vertical photos, so 4:5 is a very proper aspect ratio for Instagram, because mainly you post your photos on Instagram, and I had not really cropped my photo when I started the manipulation, and as you can see, when I'm trying to post this on Instagram, I have to crop it, and as I try to crop it, either my feet needs to get cropped, or either the top of the photo needs to be cropped, and I can't really fit it within the 4:5 aspect ratio, and this can be such a pain. So please, before you start your manipulation, always set a proper aspect ratio.